Mr. Scott Strode, welcome to the podcast, my friend. It's so good to see you.
It's good to see you too. It's been a while, but I'm excited to be here and to talk a little bit with you.
You know, today we have a really special guest. We have a real hero. I met you about 10 years ago, maybe 10 or 12 years ago, right when you were starting Phoenix, and you were operating out of a small little gym out of Denver. You were motivated with your mission, but since then you've grown to 150 employees nationwide. Your exposure is in all 50 states. You've helped over 75,000 people with addiction and turning their lives around. And just, I'm so inspired by what you've done, your journey, your impact, your mission, and just who you are. And so it's a real honor for you to be here today. I'm glad you agreed to do this with me, and I'm just so excited for people to listen to your story and learn so much from you. So I honor you, my friend.
Well, thanks for, like I said, thanks for having me. And it's exciting to talk to with you about this because, you saw the Phoenix when it was relatively small, and everything from us getting recognized by CNN Heroes to where we are now. And I've learned a lot about sort of just business operations in that time. Even though it's a nonprofit, I've just learned a lot about being a leader and
absolutely
how to sort of grow on this journey. In the early days, it was, I tried to start Phoenix to help other people, but I realized, it was kind of actually helping me heal on this wild journey we've been on. So
before we get into your business journey and your leadership, I really do want to get there because I think there's a lot to learn from you. You embody leadership, just you as a person. And so there's a ton to learn from you, and I want to get into your head about that. But before we go there, tell us a little bit about your journey, how you got here, what Phoenix is all about. Give everyone a quick little summary.
Yeah, so I struggled with addiction myself when I was younger. I experienced some early childhood trauma, and that really, kind of led me to seeking my emotional well-being externally. So, when I found drugs and alcohol, that kind of numbed that pain that I was feeling at the time. And so I was off and running, and then that sort of party lifestyle started to actually give me this sense of self-worth, right? Like I was kind of the life of the party, the guy who would always have the tray of shots going around, handing them out to folks. And then later was the guy who knew where to get whatever drug, and was, and then addiction over time, it's a sort of coping mechanism in the beginning, but it starts to sort of strip away your dreams over time. And, what was fun in the beginning turns out, just sort of you by yourself using in isolation just to kind of maintain. And, I found my way into a boxing gym. There were some guys in there that kind of scooped me up with as much love as you can find in a boxing gym, and taught me about the sport of boxing. And it was transformative. It was actually a meaningful way to kind of start healing my self-esteem wounds. And as I got on that path, started doing triathlons and climbing, I started to think, we need to give this to other people. And two of my friends one was in recovery and we climbed together, and the other was a clinical social worker that I climbed with. And I was like, hey, we should start a nonprofit and call it the Phoenix, because we're all rising from the ashes of something. And that was the beginning of launching the nonprofit.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful story, and just, again, how much impact you've created in such a short amount of time. I was talking to you about this before we started the podcast. I'm very fascinated because I think everyone has their own form of addiction, and I don't want to undermine substance abuse. So I'd love you to speak to that. And I don't have experience in that, so I'm sure there's a lot of science and research you have on that. But I think we all are in our own habits and behaviors and numb to whatever we do in our everyday life, right? And if we want to become a Phoenix, and, I love how you said, it numbs our dreams. If we're all chasing something, if we all want to manifest what we want in our life, we need to address those dark places, those demons, if you will, whether they be alcohol or drugs, or maybe their relationships, or maybe there are fears, or maybe they're, talk to us a little bit about like what you've learned. Like is there a silver bullet? What is going on in the brain? What's going on with the science? Why are we stuck in this place where we can't pivot if we need to make a strong pivot in our life? I don't mean to sound distasteful, but like, I don't want to undermine the challenges of becoming sober from a really strong addiction. But like, I think
Sure.
even the lighter stuff, I think we're all addicted to something like social media, or, we're all dealing with anxiety or fear. So help us understand and unpack a little bit of that.
Yeah, for sure. And this is, all my disclaimers, I'm not a scientist or a researcher on this, but I have lived experience, and, I've through the organization, we've helped, as you mentioned, over 75,000 people connect to this different way of living in recovery. And so for me, I think of it more in this way, and you sort of aimed at it with, we're all sort of struggling with some aspect of this. It's some people, it's more extreme, and it's with substances. But for other folks, it's maybe, how many people follow you on social, what your body looks like, how much money you make, all that stuff can be this way we're trying to find our emotional well-being outside of ourselves. And I think one of the challenges of finding it within is that you have to be able to sort of love yourself and accept yourself and forgive yourself for all the parts of you, right? Even the stuff that is tough, and realize that we're, I think it's Pia Melody, that she started a treatment program in Arizona, says we're all perfectly imperfect. Mm-hmm. And just accepting that and understanding it is a beginning step towards being able to sort of find that sort of self-esteem that ultimately helps heal us. I think, for addiction, it's a little more of an extreme thing that we attach to, but I'm excited to be on this show with you talking about this topic, because I think even the drive for financial success can be that for some folks, where they never arrive, right? The same way I had to chase more drugs or a different drug or whatever, for some folks, the number in the bank account isn't ever enough, and they need to add more to it and grow it at the expense of the things that are actually meaningful in their life. The same way I was sort of forsook those, is that the word? Forsaken those things for my drinking and my drugging. Folks do that around their pursuits in their professional career sometimes. So really what it is I think finding this balance of like being in a place where you love and accept yourself for who you are, and aspiring to change that and grow and evolve as a person, but also having meaningful connections with others and meaningful activities in your life. It could be growing your business. It could be, a passion for a hobby or sport or whatever. But when you combine those things with actually helping others, it lifts you in a different way. And I think that really the magic is when we start moving towards that place of self-actualization on our own journeys. So I went all over the place there, but
I love it. No, it's all good. I think one of the things that hit me was, when we talk about chasing, right? We talk about what we're looking for, or this unending strive for some goal out in the future, like some destination that we'll all of a sudden achieve, right? Whether it's drugs or money or success or what have you, right? We're all looking for fulfillment in our own way. And what I see in Phoenix, and what I've experienced even in the Phoenix journey, is this like fulfillment through service and fulfillment through helping people. But then there's this like really amazing part of being active and being physical. And I wonder what's going on there, right? Like, because it's this beautifully organic grown community, and it looks almost too perfect. Like everyone's just having fun. Yeah, they're helping each other. Everyone shows up authentically. Like, it's pretty remarkable, right? And it's not natural for people just to show up authentically and share their darkest parts of them and all their fears and anxieties and stresses and etc. Yet, is something about sport breaking people down and allowing them to do that. I'd love you to talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think there was a book that kind of framed it really well for me, but I think if you want to better understand addiction, there's a book called Deep Survival: Who Lives and Dies and Why. And it's really about accidents in the outdoors. It talks about the way the brain works with primary and secondary emotional responses. So we have certain things, like I just had my first son, first kid. And, if something flicks near his eye, he'll close his eye. That's a primal emotional response. It happens in the subconscious brain. But there's secondary ones that we develop over time, and they're often developed by fear or threat. And that's why I think when we're all in those formative years, in those sort of early childhood years, if we're not experiencing nurturing environments, we start developing some of these coping mechanisms that happen in the subconscious. And I think one of the messages that can play out and sort of run in that background is about our self-worth, whether we're deserving of love or worthy of love, or are we a failure, or whatever it is. And so I think some of the magic of Phoenix is that when you show up at one of our activities, so just encapsulate it really quickly, we use transformative activities like climbing and hiking and yoga and meditation and CrossFit and mindfulness, all sorts of stuff for free. We bring people around that are in recovery. You have to have 48 hours sober. And so it's a really low threshold to entry, but the person leading that activity is somebody in recovery or deeply touched by substance use, and whether it's a loved one or a parent or whatever it is. But at that activity, what's happening is you're starting to kind of disentangle that thread that maybe is run through your life about your self-worth, because you get to the top of the rock climb for the first time. And anybody who ties into a rope on rock climbing for the first time is a little scared. So there's something about that emotional vulnerability that opens up our hearts to this experience in a way that when we have that goal achievement of getting to the top, it lands in that older, darker place where that negative thought used to live, and it starts to take that space over, and we start to believe in ourselves in a different way. And you come down, and the beauty of Phoenix is everyone who's surrounding you when you get back down to the ground and high fives you and fist bumps you, has had similar experience, and they actually may believe in you even if you don't yet believe in yourself. But over time, that belief starts to sort of permeate into who you are, and there's not as much space for that negative sort of self-identity. And then there's also that service piece, which you mentioned, where all of a sudden you're now the person teaching the next person how to tie into the rope. Right. And then you're belaying them. You're actually holding their life on the other end of the rope so they can have this climbing experience. And through that process, you're now having this sense of citizenship, being part of this bigger community that believed in you, and now you get to believe in others. So it's a really special place.
And what I think about this all the time, especially as we record and we have been on this podcast journey, is people reach out to me all the time too about, oh man, hey, thanks so much for that podcast. I needed to hear that today. I needed that boost. I was feeling insecure about this, and I feel better after listening to that guy and overcoming their journey. Like, you've built a community very specifically, and it's a pure play, right, in that specific group of people. But I think it just transcends humanity too, of like us needing other people to show up vulnerably and help each other and deal with the crap that we got to clean up, right? Yeah. And I love how you mentioned even like people's ambition. Like, it can be intoxicating. It can be almost debilitating to finding joy and fulfillment because we're just chasing endlessly. So I don't know where I was going with that, but it just reminded me like how important that is to share this information and to create spaces of discussion and openness and have safe space, right?
Yeah. And I think it's, it's been really amplified these last couple years with the pandemic, because I think we realized right away that we had to pivot the way we run our business. We were in the business of bringing people together, and then we realized we can't. So what do? So we pivoted to virtual live stream programs within 48 hours of the sort of national emergency being sort of announced. And in some ways, I think our folks did better than the average person, because we know that connection is so important to us, that isolation is the fertile ground for our addiction to kind of take hold again. So we were hungry for it. Like, we just jumped right in. So people were showing up on Zoom. We didn't even know what that meant. We're trying to figure out mute buttons and, the whatever, if people's camera were on and they didn't know it. And you're like, hey man, turn your camera on or whatever. So, but we jumped right in with both feet. And I think it took a while for the world to catch up to realize that, like, this was going to be a really dangerous place we were going into, where we're disconnected in the way we were. Sadly, we see that evidence now, even in the addiction space, where in the last 12 months, we lost over 100,000 people to overdose just from opiates and illicit drugs, not even including alcohol. But I think alcohol sales were up like 50% during the pandemic. So, like, these are all signals to this bigger thing that you're talking about, which is this space in folks that feels like a hole that they need to try to fill with things that are often very fleeting. And so they're always seeking it. Whereas I think some of these meaningful sort of sense of purpose and sense of self are actually the log on the fire that will keep us warm for a long time versus the fleeting ones.
What advice do you have for people who are maybe like, I can't imagine Phoenix is a very forceful organization. It's mostly an inviting strategy, right? It's an open door type of strategy. It's not pulling strategy, in terms of people have to want to come and look for help. What advice do you have for people, or what have you seen that gets people off the chair to go look for help?
Yeah. I mean, I think that when we want to make a big life change, I think from my own experience, but I've witnessed with others, is that there's this early stage where we're sort of probing, we're reaching out. We know something's off. Maybe we're seeing however we're living or acting impacting us or people we love negatively. So we're trying to make some change, but the path, because of, I think, stigma and shame, is not very clear about how to make that change. There's one reason, we have one of our shirts just says sober on the front. And, it's like we wear that with pride. Like, I'll wear the shirt and people are like, rise, recover, live. What does that mean? And I just talk about my own recovery. So it's like breaking down that shame and stigma, making it okay to be vulnerable and ask for help, I think is important. But I think also removing sort of all the barriers to taking that step of changing your life, so that the day you have the courage to do it, you're not thwarted by whatever's in front of you on that path. So that's why our program's free. That's why we are now in 50 states. I know you talk a lot about business on this show. And, when we launched, Facebook when we first started, Facebook didn't even really exist. And now tech has come a long way. So we've, integrated that and just launched our app, which allows people to get connected wherever. And we have people coming from overseas now, and the live stream programs. And so I think it's just knowing there's a resource like the Phoenix, if addiction is what you're actually struggling with. If it's not addiction, it's just, you're still seeking your emotional well-being externally, and it feels like you're always trying to kind of scoop up the sand and hold it and keep it, but it always sort of runs through your fingers. Then, I think changing your habits and your behaviors and some of the maybe people surrounding you to just different ways of thinking and trying different things. Like, when I was trying to quit drinking, I saw a brochure for ice climbing, and I went out and I tried ice climbing, and it was terrifying. And the most bizarre thing, this frozen thing that's not even there half the year, and we're swinging axes into it and climbing it. and that just started to like open up my field of vision to the world and what's possible. So whether it's that or starting your first exercise routine or starting a meditation practice or changing the way you eat by, just adding more vegetables instead of trying to take everything away and having that sort of like peak and valley, just consistent tries, reaching out and probing and trying new things differently to see if you can start to make that change. And what you'll find, I think, is that you'll start to surround yourself with a group of people who think in a similar way, and things will start to transform.
Let's take a 90-degree turn. I want to talk about your leadership. I want to talk about you as a leader. I want to talk about some of the lessons you've learned in your growth. My experience has been with you is like, it's amazing. You have such an energy, a humility, a stature. I mean, you are like a 6 foot, 8 foot guy. Like, you're huge. So you embody that too. But like you have built such a beautiful organization, and people really do gravitate towards you as the brand and you as the face of the brand. Where does that come from? How have you been able to harness that and hold on to it? I've seen that you've never changed also in that whole process. You're incredibly humble. You're incredibly grounded in this mission that you have. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, thank you, first of all, for the compliment. It is like, it's that same thing as I talked about before. It's like sort of, I had this narrative in my head about my self-worth that kept me stuck in fear of trying. And I started, got into recovery, started doing climbing, as I mentioned, got out there with climbing guides and was just like blown away by these guys who knew everything about the mountains. And then I remember one time I actually kind of disagreed with one of them on a safety thing. And I realized like I actually became a student of this, and I actually may have best knowledge here on how to do this. And that was sort of a pivotal moment for me, like where I started to trust what my instincts were and what my sort of gut was telling me. And I think it was just sort of being raised by my mom, who you got to meet. She's a really empathetic, loving person, and she sort of honed that part of me, I think. And so starting to get some confidence, and then having that existing kind of just love for people led me to this path. But I think what happened, probably very similar to many entrepreneurs, even though it's a nonprofit, it's still an entrepreneurial
It's still a
endeavor.
business, right?
Yeah,
it's still a business.
Is that in the beginning, I was trying to heal myself through my accomplishments in healing others, right? I thought if I could help somebody, then I would feel of value and I'm worthwhile. So in the early days, we'd have maybe 100 people at Phoenix that were doing really well. And we'd have a half dozen who were still struggling really in a dark place with their addiction. And I was solely focused on those 6. And my friend was saying, what about the 100 you already helped? Like, if you do, would you help these 6 at the expense of those 100? And it started to get me thinking that like, to save somebody who's drowning in a well, you don't jump in the well with them, right? Like that's kind of how I was operating in the early days. And I started to realize that I have to rest and recover and gain the strength to go back the next day and help lift that person up who's still in there. And so I just shifted the way I was working and started to realize that I actually have this incredible opportunity to be this sort of witness for folks in this moment that's really tough for them. And I know this terrain, the same as when I was climbing. I may know this treacherous terrain a little bit better. And if I share a little bit about what I've learned, I can help maybe guide them through it. And that's just what I've been doing for the last 15 years now.
Is there, just like in any business, we're all trying to find process to scale. In the human business, in the empathy business, is there a science to hope? Is there a science to this process that you've found works to help you scale?
That's an awesome question, and I've never been asked that before. I think this is interesting because I'll tie a couple threads together here around the business side and the nonprofit side. Is we were trying to scale for years. We always knew we wanted to build a national nonprofit, not to build a huge organization, but because the need is so great in our country. And actually meeting you and some of the folks in your orbit was sort of our first step into launching Phoenix outside of where it started in Colorado. We launched in Orange County, as you remember. It was like the early days, the Wild West, trying to figure out how to grow into a new market. And over the years, we've gotten a little bit better at that, but we still didn't have sort of unlock the how to get on that hockey stick of growth. And we found our way alongside this foundation called the Stand Together Foundation. And they are sort of born from a network of folks that work with Charles Koch. And Charles Koch has this management philosophy called market-based management. And he writes about it in his book, Good Profit. And, market-based management is really unique in that it focuses on the entrepreneurial spirit and the self-actualization journey of the employees in the company, not the leaders in the company, right? Or they're employees, so it focuses on it with them, an equal amount, but it believes that best knowledge and innovation is actually going to come from the folks that are closest to the work. So that was sort of how they came alongside us to fund Phoenix and help us grow. But it's also how we've grown. We've used market-based management as our philosophy. And I know that the instructors that teach programming in LA know best what needs to happen to make Phoenix most effective in LA. So instead of us trying to hatch an idea in a boardroom and impose it on them out there, we draw them in and ask their thoughts about how to evolve our programs there. And so I think really just seeing every sort of brain and heart that comes alongside the organization in your organization as an asset that can contribute, and your organization now is as smart as everyone that's there, not just your senior leadership team.
That's so profound. I love that. I think even for me, as I listen to that, like I've probably experimented with both, right? Top down, bottom up, and learn like one is more effective than the other. But what I loved about what you said was not just about training or teaching or empowering. It's about their self-actualization.
Yeah.
Which is a spiritual journey, not a skill set or mechanical journey, right? Of trade skills or your job description. It's a self-actualization of who you are as a human on this planet in your own journey. Yeah. And if you can hone in on that, you get unlimited, untapped potential from every person within your organization. I think that's pretty profound, the way you said that. Never heard it said that way before.
And I'm totally just poaching it from Charles Koch. So
yeah, it's okay. It's a good steal.
He's been kind of successful in his endeavors.
Yeah, he's doing okay.
But I think that the beauty of that is that sometimes it means that an employee might actually to be on that journey, they might actually leave the organization, and that's okay. And if you really are still showing up for them, helping them towards that goal, culture it builds inside of the organization is really special. And you ultimately have folks that have a level of commitment and sort of buy into what you're building in a different way because they're actually building it too.
Let's talk about branding, because I think a lot of the best brands in the world are great brands, but nowadays people buy from people. And even though people are not necessarily buying anything from Phoenix, they are buying into the vision or the mission of the company, right? And you, as the face and the founder of Phoenix, are part of that brand. As you've scaled, how have you been able to, I guess, manage that? Are you trying to decentralize the brand from a face? Are you trying to are you trying to stay up and center to make sure people are very seeing and hearing that message from you directly, and that transcends the organization. I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey and figuring that out as you've scaled to this, 75,000 people nationwide or globally. It's something that I think a lot of growing companies worry about in terms of their, capacity to scale, right? Is the business constantly just going to keep buying from one person, or does that person become a face or whatever? So just love to hear what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is another great question. I think the one thing I started doing early on, because I was we were a team of a few people, a handful of folks, is I would take all the concepts and things we were working on and imagine putting them in the middle of the table and looking at them from different seats in the organization. So I'd look at sort of the risk and legal lens on this idea or concept and sort of, catastrophize it and see where the challenges or risks were. Then I'd sit in the sort of branding and marketing seat in my mind and look at it for how it advances the brand or detracts from the brand and everything, is around, I think of Phoenix really as a movement, right? This movement that believes in the intrinsic strength of people, and that anybody who's struggled and risen from the ashes can help someone else rise. And so that was really what, when thinking on the brand side, we latched onto, and I actually struggled with that other part you mentioned in the early days of like, I didn't want my story to be the lead. I just wanted to kind of help this thing move. And I realized somebody has to, in the early days, sort of share the vision with a broader audience. And now what we're trying to do is, however we can, to elevate the voices of our other leaders that are growing in the organization to do that same thing. And I do think it's working. What I see every now and then, I'll be traveling for Phoenix and I'll be in an airport and some guy comes up and says, "Dude, you go to Phoenix too, man." "I do as well." And I'm like, "Oh, where do you go?" And he's like, "I go in Milwaukee." He's like, "Where do you go?" And I was like, "Well, everywhere I can," like he just thinks I'm another guy going to Phoenix, which I think is awesome, because that's the magic, right? It's not about me.
That's right.
It's about this bigger why that we do this work. But I think that can apply for a company as well. And sometimes you need that spokesperson, but if you really buy into the self-actualization journey, for some of your leaders, evolving into that spokesperson is actually part of their path. And in which case, try to feed that where you can.
Part of the podcast allows me to study, people who have achieved different levels of success in their life and study their routines. And I think there's definitely a trend that successful people have routines and they're consistent on them. But you and your work, you're like literally building routine for thousands and thousands of people. I'm really interested in learning about your routine and how you've been able to refine that over a couple decades of this work, and what your routine is to, show up the way you show up and achieve the level of performance you do every single day.
Yeah, I think I've maybe overcorrected in the early days of my recovery. Like, I think there was a time when I first got sober, I started to connect and be in tune with my body for the first time ever in my life, sort of polluted by chemicals, and so I went the extreme, right? I like quit smoking, quit caffeine, quit like everything all at once, and was just like, living this life that actually was pretty bland. And then slowly started like introducing coffee back into it. And, now it's like, if you're in the recovery community, coffee is like the thing. Coming together around a little caffeine is, I think, okay. But so I, getting up early, I love to be up, before sunrise. Like, I'm a 5 a.m. person, no matter the time zone. And just this ritual of making coffee for my wife and I, or if I'm traveling, I actually travel with a little pour over thing. And because it's just a place that I like can calm my mind and like prepare for the day. And then for me, exercise, is really key. Just even if it's just, like a 30-minute walk with the family or going to a CrossFit class, it could be widely varied as far as how extreme it is. But I find if I don't have that in my routine throughout the week, my mind can get sort of spun out on things and start worrying about things and whatever. There's something about that raising your heart rate and releasing some of those endorphins that just sort of clears the workbench and allows you to go back to whatever you're working on with some fresh eyes. And, just to go a layer deeper on that, I think they say your cognitive workbench can have like 5 to 7 things plus or minus, on it at one time.
Right.
And that's why I find when I do sort of meditative activities, like go for a run, go for a walk, go cycling, even be on the rower in the gym, whatever it is, that workbench space opens up. And all of a sudden I start solving problems that I couldn't solve the day before because it got too cluttered. So those are just a few things that I do. And then I think no matter where your organization goes, having this moment where you do some self-reflection on like, what's your part in a dynamic? How am I showing up for a team? Am I contributing or detracting to this culture that we're trying to build at the organization? And just having that self-reflection, I think, goes a long way in keeping you humble as an organization grows. And because there's sometimes that the biggest challenges Phoenix encounters is me, right? Like me trying to get out of my own way, or we had an idea years ago about opening sort of for-profit gyms that the general public could join, and that would support the nonprofit. It just wasn't working out financially, and I knew we had to pull the plug on that concept, but it took a while because I sort of helped come up with the idea.
Yeah, you held on to it.
Yeah, but I probably held on to it past more dollars than we should have. And so I think just thinking about that, am I contributing or detracting from what we're trying to do with how I'm interacting with the organization, and just turning to others to get their opinions. And that I try to, another part of market-based management is really this challenge culture, making space for it. So that is part of the routine. Is we finish a meeting, does anybody have any challenge on that? And it's not like devil's advocate challenge. It's like challenge to make the idea better. And when that flows freely from somebody who's coaching in the gym to somebody who's in the C-suite, right? Like it's really special what you can build.
Who takes care of Scott? Scott's out building this huge organization, taking care of everyone else. Who takes care of Scott?
Well, I, a few years ago, 5 years ago, met my wife at a jiu-jitsu class, and there's a big size difference, so I was like, don't squish her, but just the fact, it tells you a lot about her, just the fact that she did a drop-in by herself at a jiu-jitsu school. Like she's scrappy and has got a big heart and is a great mom, and just being with her and my son Magnus is what sort of recharges me, and there's days in the middle of Phoenix growth where climbing for myself or my own triathlon training was my recharge, but it's really just being with them. And then also coming to Phoenix for myself, like having classes I go to where I'm just there for my own recovery, is a great way I recharge.
Love it. What keeps you up at night, if anything? I wonder.
I guess what keeps me up is probably the fact, and you alluded to this in the beginning, is that this isn't just what our area of work around substance use. We are just the louder negative coping mechanism. So people see it. They see it on the street. They see it in folks experiencing homelessness. They see active drug use and drunk driving accidents and all the really loud stuff. But it's the fact that I believe all of those are telling of a bigger underlying issue, which is the sense of, and what I really think the root of it is adverse childhood experience, folks not being raised in nurturing environments. And so I think that the work we're doing And many of the issues we've sort of faced as a country have been sort of generational challenges that have been brewing.
Sure.
And I think it's possible to just reset, right? To forgive everybody on the folks that came before us and the folks that we are today, and start anew and treat each other in a way that creates a nurturing environment. So that bigger sort of systemic challenge, I think, is the thing that keeps me up at night. But I feel like I'm doing everything I can to start to change the course of that river.
I love that. It reminds me that you cannot have anger or hate when you're grateful. Like your body, your heart cannot experience both of those emotions at the same time. It's impossible. Yeah. And I'm just so grateful that you're here and just sharing your story. I hope we created some awareness with people today, and trying to get some self-reflection and self-awareness about where they can improve or contribute, even perhaps in their life, about having these conversations and creating space for others and supporting each other and lifting other people up. So I just honor you for everything that you're doing, Scott. I'm so proud to be able to call you a friend and hang out once a decade, but we gotta do more stuff together. But just really congratulations on all your success. I guess as we wrap up, I have one final question for you.
Yeah.
For you, what does it mean to live a rich life?
I think it's do more things in your life that make you smile than make you scowl. Right? Like, you're spending most of your day smiling, then you're probably on the right track. And I think that really, to make that happen, it's the people you surround yourself with. It's people that believe and hold that flag of hope even in the darkest places. And yeah, I'd say that.
I love it, man. Well, again, thank you so much. And I honor you and wish you continued success.
Thank you. Thanks. And I can't wait till we get to go climbing again.
Yeah, let's do it. Thanks so much, man.